Good day, race fans! I'm Unsilent, and we're on the air with the Formula One Drive-Thru podcast, coming to you just hours after the conclusion of the Italian Grand Prix. The home race of Ferrari, not won by Ferrari, though I don't think anybody was really expecting it to, save for the Tifosi. It was won by Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, a dominant race for the Silver Arrows, but again, that Mercedes power. We all had an inkling this was what was going to happen. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be that big of a domination for Mercedes over Ferrari. But we will talk about that as we get into the race recap. First, let's take a look at today's topics. As always, we will start with a recap of today's race, the 2017 Italian Grand Prix. And in the news, we will talk about the latest dealings with Toro Rosso, McLaren-Honda, and Renault. From there, we will talk about what Fernando Alonso is up to in 2018. Of course, that has a lot to do with the first news topic. From there, we will talk about Sauber-Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo Sauber, is that in the cards for 2018? A report says that it is very likely to happen. We could hear about that in the next couple of days. And Max Verstappen to Mercedes in 2019 is the latest rumor. Of course, that all depends on a little bit of options and political dealings. We'll detail that in a few moments. But first, the Italian Grand Prix, as I mentioned, won by Lewis Hamilton. Lights to flag victory, well, I guess except for the pit stop when Bottas got by him, but close enough to lights to flag victory as Hamilton picks up the win 4.5 seconds over Bottas with Hamilton was basically already on the podium by the time Vettel came across the line. 36 seconds behind Hamilton was Vettel. And then you had Ricciardo, who was driver of the day, I might add, coming from position number 16 on the grid. I have to look that up. I have to keep the grid handy because of so many grid penalties. For example, there were so many grid penalties. Kevin Magnussen started 9th. He qualified 16th. He didn't make it out of Q1, and yet he started in the top 10. There were so many guys who got various penalties for power units or gearboxes or what have you that got pushed back down the grid. Then behind Ricciardo, you had Raikkonen, Esteban Ocon, who started 3rd, Lance Stroll, who started 2nd, Felipe Massa finished P8, Sergio Perez made his way to P9, and Max Verstappen, who qualified 2nd, then started P13 after all the penalties were applied, then charged his way up to P8 off the start, and then got a puncture after bumping into Massa at the first chicane there. After 3 laps, 4 laps, and then charged his way back up to the points. Christian Horner was quick to point out that Verstappen started 13th in the RB13 in the 13th race and still managed to score a point. Although I think it would have been more oddly appropriate if he also finished 13th as well after going up and down the grid all day. But let's start with the start of the race. It was Hamilton leading from Lance Stroll, who qualified 4th yesterday in qualifying, and then after penalties to the Red Bulls, got up to 2nd, so he's the youngest front row starter in F1 history, and then proceeded to... It looked like he got spooked when Hamilton immediately came to cut him off at the start, and that let Ocon by into position number 2. We knew that they weren't going to stay there for very long, neither Stroll nor Ocon, because you're surrounded, you've got Bottas behind you, you've got 2 Ferraris behind you, but it didn't take very long. 3 laps in, Bottas by Stroll, then 1 lap later, Bottas by Ocon, 1 lap after that, it was Vettel by Stroll for P4, a lap after that, it was Vettel by Ocon, so in 6 laps, your 2nd and 3rd place starters have fallen behind the top 3. It wasn't unexpected, but I don't know if anyone expected the Mercedes power of Stroll and Ocon to get swallowed up that quickly by Vettel, for sure. By the 2 factory Mercedes, yeah, it's understandable. But that was the other surprising thing was Raikkonen really struggled to have the pace to get by Stroll and Ocon. He got by Stroll on the pit stops. Poor Stroll. Williams is the fastest pit stop crew in the business, and yet he gets a 4.5 second pit stop when he needs a quick stop the most. If they had done a regular 2 second pit stop, he would have come out side by side with Ocon. He may have been just ahead coming into the first chicane. Would he have been able to hold him off forever? Maybe, maybe not. He wouldn't have been able to hold off Raikkonen, I don't think. But it would have been a nice dice with the Force India of Ocon. But instead, he just kind of ended up behind them and just kept dropping back and back and back. Of course, that was back and back and back until he fell into the clutch of his teammate Massa at the very end. And we didn't see it on TV, but apparently the two Williams bumped into each other, or at least Crofty said the two Williams bumped into each other in the first chicane. But like I said, we never saw it, so I don't know exactly what quite happened there. Well, actually, I do know what happened there. Stroll stayed in front, ended up picking up points ahead of his teammate. Stroll ended up taking home 7th. Again, not a bad result for the young Canadian, but a little bit more consistency. These great performances are all well and good, but needs to do it on a more regular basis. Yeah, sadly, not one of the more exciting races in Formula One history. It looked like at first in the early running that it was going to be one of those, IndyCar or NASCAR style races with slipstream battles where it's like, well, you don't want to be the one leading in the last lap. And then as the race sort of settled in, it was kind of like it just as cars strung out. Just sort of all calmed down. The most exciting part of the race might have been watching the Red Bulls climb through the field repeatedly. Verstappen picking off guys left, right, and center. Ricciardo picks off a few guys and settles in for a very, very long first stint on the softs before switching to the super softs and almost mowing down Vettel at the very end. But that was the race, with Hamilton picking up the win. Getting booed on the podium by the Tifosi, but I think you kind of expect that anybody who isn't a Ferrari driver winning the race is going to get booed at Monza. I'm going to rant for a second here, and I know the Hamilton fans already hate me, but whatever. If you're a Manchester United fan and Arsenal walks in and picks up the winner, you're going to cheer, oh, yay, we saw a good football match that Arsenal won, yay. No, you're going to boo the absolute living crap out of them. And that is the equivalent here. It's anybody who's challenging Ferrari for a championship is the hated rival. And that's 9 other teams, really. And when you're Ferrari's chief rival for a championship this season, you are not going to get love for the Tifosi. When he steps into a Ferrari, if he ever drives for the Scuderia, he will be cheered like a hero. This will all be forgotten. But for now, as long as he is driving for a Scuderia rival, and he is challenging the Scuderia driver for the championship, you damn well better believe he's getting booed. And you have to admit, Hamilton heel turned on them at the end by saying Mercedes power is better than Ferrari power. Oh, you better believe that's a heel turn. That is a pro wrestling villain move there to just wind up the fans like that. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just played into the boos right there. So even Hamilton accepted it. So I won't hear any complaints about Hamilton being booed at somebody else's home race. So with the race recap done, here's the driver's standings. Lewis Hamilton takes the lead, 3 points ahead of Sebastian Vettel, his first points lead of the season as we complete the European portion of the season. But now we get into a few tracks that might just favor Ferrari a little more than Hamilton's Mercedes as we go to the Singapore Grand Prix next. And then Bottas well back over a race behind. Daniel Ricciardo in 4th, and then Kimi Räikkönen holding down 5th for Ferrari rounds out the top 5. And with that, it's time to do the news! And we start with a really quickly developing story as of writing. We're waiting to see how it plays out from here, but we'll probably know more in the next couple of days because we had the appearance of the Renault bosses at McLaren Hospitality with Ross Brawn the other day at Monza. 1 week after it was reported that any potential Honda and Toro Rosso deal was off the table, it suddenly came back to life. This has McLaren talking to Renault about picking up Toro Rosso's engine supply that had been planned for 2018. Toro Rosso's self-imposed deadline for having its engine supply deal in place is the end of day Sunday, so we'll know shortly what engine that STR and McLaren are going to have for 2018. There's also the outside possibility that McLaren could, maybe, but highly unlikely, just dump Honda altogether and go over to Renault, but Renault does not seem too keen on supplying 4 teams. And that leads us into the next story. What's Fernando Alonso up to for 2018? Well, the top seats have already been settled for 2018. So it's where does Alonso land in the midfield? And it looks like it all comes down to what the engine is in the back of that McLaren. Now, there are 4 teams that are actively or passively courting Alonso. Now, we know that McLaren wants to keep him, but Alonso is strongly hinted that a Honda engine would be a deal breaker for re-signing there. Force India has publicly suggested that they'd be a great fit for Alonso, but we don't know if there's any actual interest in signing him. Renault has been rumored to be courting Alonso for months now, but they admit they won't contend for a title for a couple of years, so they aren't likely to want to be the butt end of Alonso memes and mean-spirited barbs over the radio. Now, the fourth team is Williams. Now, they have the advantage of having a Mercedes engine and the backing of some major sponsors, including the Stroll family bank account. Last week, a report came out that said that Williams has made a contract offer to Alonso, with Lawrence Stroll, who's Lentz's billionaire father, directly involved in negotiations. Failing all of this, though, there is a rumor that Alonso could go to IndyCar and sign with Andretti Autosport for next season while his F1 future sorts itself out. Alonso's first plan was kind of similar, as he had a rumored pre-contract with Porsche for years before Porsche terminated its LMP1 program a few months back, and it'll be concluding at the end of this season. Now, there are a few side notes in this story. One is that Felipe Massa has offered to return to Grove and run for Williams in 2018 should the team need an over 25 driver. And the second is that Alonso is only interested in a one-year contract to keep his options open for 2019. So for Williams to get a new driver in there to help them with developing their car, because that's really one of the areas they're struggling the most is car development, that would benefit them greatly. And if you're McLaren, you really would like to have somebody like Alonso in for the long term to help that team out. Of course, that all comes down to the engine, which is why they're so desperate to jettison Honda and bring in Renault. Speaking of engine deals, that new alliance between Ferrari and Sauber could be a little deeper than just an engine supply with a race seat for Charles Leclerc. A new report says the Sauber team could be used to bring back the Alfa Romeo name to the sport. Fiat boss Sergio Marchionne has been talking a while about bringing Alfa back to Formula One. Now, the extent of that rebranding could go just beyond Alfa Romeo branded engines. The whole team could be rebranded as Alfa Romeo, similar to the BMW days when Sauber was branded BMW Sauber rather than Sauber BMW, the constructor followed by the engine name, as you would traditionally do, like Sauber-Ferrari this season. So an announcement is expected at some point this week if it doesn't happen later on today. But we could be seeing a whole, if it's not a formal takeover of Sauber, it's a really extensive sponsorship deal that Fiat could have with Sauber to bring back Alfa Romeo into Formula One. And finally, people are already talking about driver moves for 2019, and that includes the fate of Max Verstappen. Well, Max was high on Ferrari's wish list, with Vettel staying through 2020 and Charles Leclerc likely replacing Raikkonen after 2018. Doesn't look like Max is going to have a seat at the Scuderia until 2021 at the earliest, and that's assuming Lewis doesn't come for that seat either. Lewis has been talking about jumping to Ferrari as sort of an end-of-career dream for him, so there's going to be some competition for that seat if Vettel doesn't stay after 2020. Now, German publication Auto Bild, which everyone says you should take with a grain of salt, says that Verstappen could be out of contract at the end of 2018, and Mercedes is already planning to snap him up for 2019. Now, Red Bull has an option on Max for 2019, but it's only triggered if Red Bull is in the top 3 of the Constructors' Championship next September. Now, it's possible that the clause is that Max himself has to be in the top 3 of the driver's standings for the option to kick in. That would be similar to Vettel's contract prior to his departure to Ferrari, where he had to be in the top 3 of the World Drivers' Championship in the final season of his contract in order for the option to be automatically kicked in. Now, Red Bull's Helmut Marko says that Mercedes were in touch with Max after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Now, it may have been that they were asking about 2018 availability, since it was only very recently reported that Bottas would be retained for 2018, and even then, it's only for 1 year. 2019 could have Hamilton and Verstappen and Mercedes, Vettel and Leclerc and Ferraris, Ricciardo and Sainz, probably Ocon and Perez still at Force India. Probably not Alonso, but maybe Alonso and Stroll in the Williams. Maybe Alonso and Bottas, or Bottas and Stroll, some combination of those 3 in Williams. 2019 looks like it's going to be a hell of a lot more interesting than 2018 if all these driver moves go through. And that will do it for this episode of the Formula One Drive-Thru podcast. There's a very good possibility we'll be back before the next race, because of all the news that could be breaking over the next couple of days. But we will, regardless, be back for sure after the Singapore Grand Prix. So will we see Vettel claw back into the championship lead? Well, we'll just have to tune back in 2 weeks for the Singapore Grand Prix. But until the next time, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you're new. Share on social media. Follow on social media. The social media handle is Unsilent on Air, and that's for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. And until the next time, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.